The US has also employed its sanctions tactics with India several times in the past. Despite this, US-India relations are currently stronger than ever. However, the US occasionally uses the threat of sanctions as a strategic tool. Despite these efforts, the US has never succeeded in pressuring India to fully conform to its will. Let me give you some examples. The United States has historically been opposed and never wanted India to have nuclear weapons. India wanted nuclear weapons not to threaten any country, but rather as a means of asserting its sovereignty on the global stage. In 1974, India conducted its first nuclear weapons test under the codename Smiling Buddha. Despite this milestone, India still found itself not quite on par with established nuclear states. Over the next 2 decades, successive Indian prime ministers attempted to advance nuclear research efforts. However, the specter of American surveillance satellites and the looming threat of sanctions proved to be significant obstacles. Despite these challenges, the fear of sanctions did not deter India from pursuing its nuclear ambitions. In 1998, India made a bold move by conducting a series of nuclear tests, declaring itself a full-fledged nuclear state. And as expected, the US responded by slapping economic sanctions on India. This reaction was hardly surprising, given the US's track record. What some Europeans and the Japanese did is irrelevant, as they typically follow the US's lead and would likely lift their sanctions as soon as Washington does. The US placed a ban on 208 Indian entities, including both private and public sectors, particularly those contributing to India's nuclear missile and weapons programs. However, these sanctions didn't significantly halt or slow down India's nuclear advancements. Today, India has over 160 nuclear weapons and enough weapons-grade plutonium, approximately 700 kilograms for up to 213 warheads. Its missiles are capable of carrying multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles with intercontinental ranges. Additionally, Indian engineers are building 6 fast breeder reactors by 2033 to produce both electric power and fissile material. Before that, the US opposed India's acquisition of cryogenic engine technology for its space launch vehicles, fearing its potential for longer-range ballistic missiles. This led to pressure on Russia to halt the transfer, though the threat of sanctions temporarily slowed down India's aspirations for a more powerful launch vehicle, but it did not deter India entirely. In fact, India has since developed and successfully launched moon missions using its indigenous cryogenic launch vehicles. In 2019, the US imposed sanctions on countries importing oil from Iran, aiming to pressure Iran over its nuclear program. India, which relied on Iranian oil imports, initially complied with the sanctions, but later resumed limited imports from Iran. Despite US pressure, India sought waivers and alternative arrangements to maintain its energy security, highlighting its willingness to prioritize its national interests over US sanctions. In 2018, India signed a deal with Russia to purchase the S-400 missile defense system, despite the threat of US sanctions, under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. While the US expressed concerns about the deal and the potential for sanctions, India proceeded with the purchase, citing its national security interests and long-standing defense ties with Russia. And the funny thing is US sanctions Turkey over purchase of Russian S-400 missile system. The Chabahar port project in Iran is indeed another significant example where US sanctions have not deterred India from pursuing its strategic interests. And recently, the United States issued a warning to anyone considering business deals with Iran without specifically mentioning India. This warning came just hours after India and Iran signed the Chabahar port agreement. India's participation in the development of the Chabahar port serves its strategic goals of improving connectivity and trade with Afghanistan and Central Asia, bypassing Pakistan. Despite US sanctions on Iran, India has persisted in its involvement with the Chabahar project, seeing it as vital for regional stability and its own economic interests. In short, the US pressure has had limited effect on India. But what is the reason behind it? The thing is, it's not because the US has any particular affection towards India. It rarely does with any country, and the closest relationship it comes to is with Israel, often considered the most special bilateral relationship. However, back in March, the United Nations Security Council finally passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The United States, which had been the only remaining hurdle to such a call, decided not to strike down the resolution.